Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 3 years, the world has been divided firmly in two camps. The ones who believe that Ukraine was wrongfully invaded and the ones who believe that Putin is being vilified. But India has always been the outlier. On your screen now, you will see these two powerful images that sum up the story. One from Kremlin and the other from Kyiv. The Prime Minister's hug to both the warring leaders on their own soil, and two hugs that came within a month of each other. This sent a powerful message that India has a side to choose in this war, and it is a side of peace. It is a side of humanity. It will always choose dialogue over discord. Interestingly, this message has not just resonated globally, but within Indian politicians back home. In fact, the Prime Minister's hug diplomacy has even softened the heart of one of his staunchest critics. I'm talking, of course, about Shashi Tharoor. Just 3 years ago, the Congress MP and former MOS for External Affairs had warned India about its stance on the Russia-Ukraine war, cautioning that the country was walking a tightrope. Fast forward to 2025, he has admitted that he was wrong and has publicly acknowledged that India's stand on the Ukraine war was indeed the right one. Speaking at the Raisina dialogue that's going on, Shashi Tharoor has highlighted how India's balanced approach allowed Prime Minister Modi to maintain cordial relations with both Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky and Russia's Vladimir Putin, and that it was the country's policy that made it possible for the Prime Minister to be able to hug both presidents just weeks apart and be accepted in both places. Listen in to this change of stance.
As I mentioned to the Foreign Minister, it was not just the abstention. Abstention, there are good reasons why we wanted to signal a certain position. But the fact that in the initial statements of the United Nations, we failed to mention any of the principles that we have stood for in the world for the last 75 years. We didn't mention the UN Charter, we didn't mention state sovereignty, we didn't mention the inviolability of borders, we didn't mention even the inadmissibility of the use of force when it comes to resolving international disputes. Our choices can sometimes involve standing up for principles. We have a special, privileged strategic partnership with Russia. We have to understand that in this particular instance, it is Russia that resorted to the use of force.
Yes, I'm still wiping the egg off my face because I was the one person in the parliamentary debate who actually criticized the Indian position at the time, back in February 22, on the well-worn ground that there was a violation of the UN Charter, that there had been a violation of the principle of the inviolability of borders, of the sovereignty of a member state, namely Ukraine, and we had always stood for the inadmissibility of the use of force to settle international disputes.
Now, as expected, his remarks have sparked a political war in the country. Shashi Tharoor's own party has refused to acknowledge his stance, while, of course, it has given ample ammunition to BJP leaders to gloat, with many of them applauding Congress members for recognizing Modi's global stature. And the BJP has also put the gambit on Rahul Gandhi to now second Shashi Tharoor and give his candid endorsement also of the centre's foreign policy. But the Congress seems to be distancing itself, claiming that these are merely Tharoor's personal views. Ironically, it was Tharoor who had led the party's charge on this very issue in Parliament not very long ago. Listen into how the two parties now react.
शशि थरूर जी स्वीकार कर रहे हैं कि आज भारत सरकार की नरेंद्र मोदी जी की फॉरेन पॉलिसी बेहतर है और हमने उस समय अपोज किया था, लेकिन अब मैं रियलाइज़ कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि जिस तरह से नरेंद्र मोदी का एक विश्व में बढ़ता हुआ प्रभाव है, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मंचों पर चाहे यूनाइटेड नेशंस हो, G20 हो, सार्क हो, दावोस हो या जो भी है, उन सारे तो उनको अब रियलाइज अगर हुआ तो ये बात कांग्रेस पार्टी वालों को समझ में आना चाहिए कि जो शशि थरूर खुद भी काफ़ी जानकार हैं, अगर अब वो इस बात को मानते हैं कि भारत की फॉरेन पॉलिसी अच्छी है तो अब कम से कम राहुल को क्रिटिसाइज नहीं करना चाहिए, जो बार बार केवल चाइना की तारीफ कर रहे हैं। उनकी तो कोई पॉलिसी नहीं है कि वो कभी पाकिस्तान की बात करेंगे, कभी चाइना की बात करेंगे।
We need to understand that for India's interest, Congress always stands. Congress doesn't act for any purpose. Congress acts for India. Our colleague Shashi Tharoor is a senior diplomat. Therefore, he has his views on the diplomatic and the foreign relations. India is always a country which should maintain its neutrality with the friendship with all other countries, and we all know that India's non-alignment policy for long has been strength for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tharoor's remarks speak volumes about the growing rift within the Congress party. He had earlier upset his party by praising the CPM's policies in Kerala and the state's growth. In a Malayalam podcast last month, he had also talked, quote-unquote, about options if the party doesn't want him or his services. So the question remains whether to let Shashi Tharoor be or not to be within the Congress party. It's this Shakespearean dilemma that the Congress must now face. And to get answers on this Shakespearean dilemma, let me go across to my guests. So joining me, we have Varun Purohit, who is a political analyst, Imran Ahmed Ali, who is a lawyer and a political analyst as well. I also have Jasmine Sandwalia, spokesperson of the BJP. And to bring us and keep us in perspective about what's actually happening geopolitically, I have Suresh Kumar Goyal, who is of course a former ambassador. Thank you all for joining me at this point. Let me begin with you, Varun Purohit. If Shashi Tharoor, if there is a rare instance, Varun Purohit, where a prominent leader of the opposition कह रहे हैं कि जो सरकार ने बोला है वो सही है, जो सरकार ने किया है वो नीति सही निकली है, पूरे विश्व भर में अब उस नीति की प्रशंसा हो रही है, कांग्रेस पार्टी इसको अपनाने में इतना हिचकिचा क्यों रही? इसमें भी जब सैम पिट्रोडा उल्टे सीधे चीजें बोलते हैं तब उनको घंटों लग जाते हैं बोलने के लिए कि ये सैम पिट्रोडा के व्यूज नहीं है, हमारे व्यू है। अब जब शशि थरूर जी ने एक अच्छी बात बोली है, देश के समर्थन में बोली है, तो उसको लेकर कांग्रेस पार्टी इतनी हेजिटेंट क्यों हो रही है अपनाने के लिए?
भट्टाचार्य जी, सबसे पहले तो मैं बता दूं, जो भी फॉरेन पॉलिसी है कंट्री की लास्ट 77 ईयर्स में, नेहरू जी के टाइम भी पंचशील थी, सब उसी को फॉलो कर रहे हैं। कोई भी प्राइम मिनिस्टर, ऐसा नहीं है कि मोदी जी के टाइम भी बहुत ज्यादा हो गया यार, इंदिरा जी, राजीव जी, अटल जी का कोई प्रभाव नहीं था दुनिया में। तो ये सब जो एक पाखंड और प्रोपेगेंडा करते हैं, उससे बाहर आना की आवश्यकता है। भारत का जो भी प्रधानमंत्री होगा उसको पूरी दुनिया पूछती। अब आपने बात की शशि थरूर की, मैंने पिछली बार भी डिबेट में कहा था, आपने सैम पिट्रोडा का भी नाम लिया, दोनों का ही नाम ले रहा हूं, और भी बहुत से लोग हैं जो पार्टी कैडर से नहीं आते हैं, तो उनके जो स्टेटमेंट्स आते हैं वो कमिटमेंट नहीं होता पार्टी स्पिरिट्स के साथ में। पार्टी स्पिरिट के साथ कमिटमेंट क्यों नहीं होता? क्योंकि एनएसयूआई यूथ कांग्रेस सेवा दल से होके नहीं आते हैं, डायरेक्ट पर्सनल ऑब्लिगेशन से आते हैं। मेरा कोई फ्रेंड है, जैसे राजीव जी के टाइम क्या हुआ, क्यों उनको प्रॉब्लम आई कि उन्होंने अपने जो स्कूल कॉलेज के फ्रेंड सर्किल था उनको बुला करके साथ में ले लिया। तो कांग्रेस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, कांग्रेस वर्कर के शोल्डर्स पे अगर आप ऐसे लाके इम्पोर्टेड, जैसे आई विल यूज दिस वर्ड इम्पोर्टेड पॉलिटिशियंस को ला करके आप लगाओगे तो उनको क्या समझ में आएगा पार्टी का दर्द क्या है, वर्कर का दर्द क्या है? उनको तो जो सुपरफिशियल उनकी खुद की जो प्रोफेशन है उस हिसाब से स्टेटमेंट्स देंगे। तो शशि थरूर हो, सैम पिट्रोडा हो, इनको कांग्रेस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में कहीं भी जगह नहीं देनी चाहिए। मैं आज फिर रिपीट कर रहा हूं, पार्टी बैकग्राउंड का कोई आदमी होता है उसको देना चाहिए। दूसरी, कांग्रेस पार्टी को प्रॉब्लम क्यों आती है? जो कांग्रेस पृष्ठभूमि का नहीं है, गैर कांग्रेस पृष्ठभूमि का है, उसको लाके आप इंपॉर्टेंट पोस्ट पे बैठा दोगे, उसके स्टेटमेंट भी वैसे ही आएंगे। तो ये कांग्रेस के सेंट्रल सिस्टम को दुरुस्त करने की मैं कई साल से कह रहा हूं आवश्यकता है कि दे शुड सी कि जिसको ला करके आप कांग्रेस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ला रहे हो वो पार्टी कैडर का ही हो। अगर आप शशि थरूर इज अ गुड डिप्लोमेट, फॉरेन पॉलिसी का एक्सपर्ट है, तो आप फॉरेन पॉलिसी में यूज में लीजिए। पार्टी के अंदर क्या मतलब है ला करके यूज लेने का? ऐसे ही जब क्रिकेटर्स होते हैं, फिल्म स्टार्स होते हैं जो बगैर रगड़ाई के आते हैं, मैं सुनील दत्त, शत्रुघ्न सिन्हा का एग्जाम, मेरी बात पूरी हो जाए दो 10 सेकंड।
तो उस रेट से तो एस जयशंकर जी को भी नहीं होना चाहिए एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स मिनिस्टर, वो भी बीजेपी के पास, वो भी आरएसएस से थोड़ी ना आए हैं, वो भी संघ से नहीं है। आपकी ये जो ऑनेस्टली आपकी ये जो व्यू पॉइंट है वो काफी नैरो लग रही है वरुण पुरोहित जी। आई डोंट वांट टू मेक दिस अ डिबेट अबाउट शशि थरूर बीइंग अ करेक्ट कांग्रेस। एक तो अगर ये आक्रोश है, आपको ये सवाल एक तो आपको ये सवाल फिर राहुल गांधी, सोनिया गांधी जी से पूछना है। उन्होंने शशि थरूर जी को पार्टी में लाया, उनको केंद्रीय मंत्री भी बनाया जब यूपीए पावर में था, उनको बार बार टिकट में मिल रहा है, बार बार इलेक्टेड भी होते हैं। आपको अगर ये लॉजिक है कि बस जो पार्टी के दल से निकले उन्हीं को मिलना चाहिए एमपी का टिकट, उन्हीं को सीनियर लीडर्स होना चाहिए, उस रेट से जयशंकर जी को भी नहीं होना चाहिए।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल उन्हीं को मिलना चाहिए भट्टाचार्य जी, उन्हीं को मिलना चाहिए। आप एस जयशंकर की बात कर रहे हो, तो वो जो फॉरेन मिनिस्टर बना दिया, तो उसमें मैंने कहा ना, फॉरेन मिनिस्टर अगर एक्सपर्ट है बना दिया तो उसमें कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, पर विद इन द पार्टी, विद इन द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन इनका क्या रोल होगा? इनका क्या मतलब है रोल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के अंदर में? आप शशि थरूर को आपने बना दिया, मिनिस्टर बना दिया, फॉरेन पॉलिसीज में बना दिया, एक्सपर्ट है तो, लेकिन आप पार्टी के अंदर जो इंटरफेरेंस है वो इन लोगों का किसी हाल में नहीं होना चाहिए। मैंने कहा फिल्म हीरो हीरोइंस आ जाते हैं, क्रिकेटर्स आ जाते हैं, उनको आप ला रहे हो वो भी गलत ला रहे हो। अगर रगड़ाई करके आते हैं जैसे सुनील दत्ता है, शत्रुघ्न सिन्हा है, तो दैट इज गुड। वो आ रहे हैं सोशल लाइफ में आकर के फिर आते हैं, तो आते हैं आप डायरेक्ट लिया है किसी क्रिकेटर को एमपी बना दिया, वो कैसे आप रिप्रेजेंटेशन देगा पार्लियामेंट में? आप 5 साल बाद वापस चला जाता है अपनी फील्ड में। तो ये भारत की जो पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम है,
देखिए वरुण जी,
दिस डिबेट
इज नॉट अबाउट वेदर शशि थरूर This debate is not about whether Shashi Tharoor deserves to be in the Congress party. कांग्रेस ने डिसीजन लिया है, उन्होंने शशि थरूर जी को नॉमिनेट किया है टिकट में, वो जीतकर पार्लियामेंट में आ चुके हैं। नाउ आपको वेदर आपको पसंद आए ना पाए, Shashi Tharoor represents the Congress party and he has given a view which many people believe is long overdue. Imran Ahmed Ali, come in at this point. Why do you think the Congress party, now one would assume that the Congress party has looked at the merit behind nominating Shashi Tharoor as an MP and making him the face of the party for many years now, because he has a certain skill set, especially when it comes to geopolitics and diplomacy. Why would the party not follow his lead and say that, okay, if someone who really understands diplomacy, someone who has served in the United Nations, he has the maturity to say that, okay, we were wrong, maybe the party should also acknowledge and say that, okay, yes, maybe our criticism of the Prime Minister's approach in 2022 was probably not the right one.
Okay, so let's first address the issue whether the Congress party should support this statement or not. Mr. Tharoor made it amply clear that this was his personal opinion. When we talk about that, we need to understand that the toughest pie to eat is a humble pie. And instead of learning from Mr. Shashi Tharoor, who transverses and goes beyond the limitations of a political party, in which he should be praised for his neutrality, he should be praised for his intellectual honesty and humility, we stand here and criticize a gentleman who has the ability to stand up for what he thinks. I'm again correcting everyone here. He did not justify the violation of the UN Charter. He did not justify violating the sovereignty of Ukraine. He did not justify the use of force. However, he is a man who justified and said that today India is in a position where he can hug both the premiers of the state. When we talk about Mr. Tharoor specifically, let's go back in time. We talk about how he praised the government with its firm stance on China in 22. The Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, I remember for a fact, he was one of the first people who went viral because being from an opposite political party or the other political party, he actually supported it with open arms, and he even wrote about it in one of his books. When we talk about vaccine diplomacy, Mr. Tharoor supported the government again then. And we talk about him praising the Prime Minister at different occasions. He did talk about his energy and commitment. So whether we talk, and the fact that this leader, the way he is rare in politics. And we need to understand that when he was answering a specific question that was posed to him, that where does he stand today? And I think it's his neutrality, it's his humility and honesty that he gave the reply he did. So instead of criticizing, and I completely I completely disagree with the gentleman before me, where he said that, you say that a sports person should be a sports minister. That may be right, but this is a gentleman who's represented India at the United Nations. There's nobody who knows diplomacy better than him. So instead of criticizing him, instead of telling him that, the Congress should have better leaders, I think we need to at some times go beyond this. And we need to go beyond these borders and limit political parties. So I completely support Mr. Tharoor.
Okay. So I think Varun ji's audio is, Varun ji, aapki awaaz, please, I request you to mute it, and I'll also ask PCR to mute his audio when he's not saying, so that my other guests do not get distracted here. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, isn't it unfortunate? The other day, the Prime Minister, when he was speaking in a podcast with Lex Fridman, said that criticism is welcome, but genuine criticism is very rare, and often it's criticism just for the sake of it. This is what a genuine democracy should be there. An opposition or a government which is ready to admit its failures. And the fact still remains that in the last 3 years, especially with the way we have seen the Trump administration pivot towards Putin and away from Zelensky, which has really isolated the European Union at this point, it seems that it was an incredibly foresighted decision by the Indian government 3 years ago to not give in to the pressures of the Western order, not give in to the pressures of the Biden administration or the NATO or European Union, and take sides in a war that has proven to be something which is far more than a black and white war of one party being the aggressor and one party being the victim.
Ritangshu, one or two things. Am I audible? Can you hear me? Is my sound coming?
Yes, please go on, Ambassador Goel.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Ambassador Goel, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. All right. One or two things here. I have known Shashi Tharoor since 1991 when I went to New York as part of the Indian mission to the United Nations for the first time. He was part of the UN bureaucracy at that time. Number one thing, I have found him an extremely professional diplomat who knows exactly the policy, who knows how the policy has to be implemented. A first-rate diplomat, a first-rate person who knows this area, number one. Number two, it takes a lot of courage for somebody to admit that he's still wiping the egg off his face for having said something 2 years ago. How many ministers or how many bureaucrats on public media have had the courage to admit that they made a mistake when they said something? No name ever comes to my mind. Number three, and that's very, very important, foreign policy is not a subject of partisan debate. Foreign policy, ever since I have been in the service, has always been a matter of national consensus. Whether it was Jawaharlal Nehru, or it was Indira Gandhi, or Rajiv Gandhi, whoever it was a national consensus. Do you remember when Prime Minister Narendra Modi sent Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the leader of opposition, to Geneva to argue the case in the Human Rights Council on the matter of Jammu and Kashmir? Do you remember that? It was done by Narasimha Rao as the Prime Minister to send the leader of opposition. There was no partisan politics at that time. Unfortunately, when I came here, I was hoping that we will have a serious foreign policy discussion. I'm a bit disappointed because we are having a partisan political discussion again. And that is very, very disappointing to me, really. Because what happened really was Shashi Tharoor saying that, yes, what Prime Minister Modi at that time did was the right decision. And that right decision was in the context of the Indian foreign policy, which, let me again say, has not changed very much at all. It has been tweaked depending upon the power we have. Every foreign policy implementation is a matter of the comprehensive national power we have. If our comprehensive national power has increased now, we are able to take a bolder decision. We can do things which we couldn't think of doing 20 years ago. But it is different now. So what happened? Prime Minister Modi, all that he did was that he stayed away from the partisan politics between Ukraine and Russia. And now it takes a deft political move or diplomatic move to do so. He did so. Shashi Tharoor at that time made a statement because we had been close to Soviet Union and the Russian Federation. And again, he said, in terms of our own affiliations, foreign policy, we should have been critical of Russian Federation. So what? He made a statement as a political leader in the parliament, but as a foreign policy professional. That is over. So I'm sorry, but I've spoken for a long time, but the fact is that I find this debate calling Shashi Tharoor name totally
Ambassador Goel, I agree with you. And ideally, we should not be having this debate. I would have much preferred, as you pointed out, a more nuanced debate about India's foreign policy and success. But unfortunately, this is only a reflection of the discourse that we're seeing with the politicians here. You have one leader, senior leader of the opposition party, making the very nuanced stance, which would ideally allow and encourage a very important debate in parliament, not just in the studios, but that's quickly been shot down by his own party. And that is precisely why the question today is being asked to the Congress party. Varun Purohit, I hope you have heard what Ambassador Goel has said, and that is also the view which सभी diplomats and foreign geopolitical experts यही मानते हैं कि जो लिया गया है तो वो सही है। जो जब मॉक करने की बात आई है तो वॉर रुकवा दी पापा लेकर कांग्रेस पार्टी ने बहुत खिल्ली उड़ाई मोदी सरकार जी की। नाउ पॉइंट इज कि कांग्रेस पार्टी को इसी बात पर भी जज किया जाता है कि अगर आप सरकार में होते हैं आप किस तरीके से अप्लाई करते हो, और अगर आपके सीनियर मोस्ट लीडर जो कायदे से एमईए मिनिस्टर बन सकता है अगर कांग्रेस पार्टी कभी कभी जिंदगी में कभी पावर में आए, उन्हीं की बातों को सीरियसली नहीं लिया जाता है पार्टी में, तो फिर कांग्रेस तो एक रिस्पॉन्सिबल ऑपोजिशन का भूमि तो निभा ही नहीं रही है।
भट्टाचार्य जी, मिस्टर एम्बेसडर ने सब बातें ठीक की और उन्होंने ये भी कहा नेहरू जी, इंदिरा जी, राजीव जी के टाइम समय के अनुसार, समय काल परिस्थिति के अनुसार जियो पॉलिटिकल सिचुएशन होती है उसके अनुसार निर्णय लिए जाते हैं फॉरेन पॉलिसी के। मैंने स्टार्टिंग में ही आपको कहा कोई भी प्राइम मिनिस्टर हो, मोदी जी आ जाएं, अगला प्राइम मिनिस्टर जो भी आएगा समय काल परिस्थिति भारत की क्षमता के अनुसार निर्णय लेगा और उसको सब समर्थन करते हैं। आपने जो अभी जो पॉलिटिकल बात उठ रही है शशि थरूर के स्टेटमेंट की कि पहले क्या स्टेटमेंट दिया अब क्या स्टेटमेंट दिया, वो कोई स्टेट्समैनशिप नहीं है उनकी। जो अभी कह रहे थे कोई करेज है, करेज तो प्रधानमंत्री जी में भी होनी चाहिए थी कि 2 करोड़ रोजगार नहीं दे पाए, नोटबंदी में लोग कितने परेशान हो गए, फेल हो गई नोटबंदी, कितने लोग परेशान हुए, तो उसकी करेज होती तो प्रधानमंत्री जी भी सॉरी बोलते भाई कंट्री के साथ मैंने ऐसा किया। ऐसी बात पे मैं नहीं जा रहा, लेकिन जो आप शशि थरूर जी की बात बार बार कर रहे हो वो स्टैंड इसलिए बदला है क्योंकि वो कांग्रेस से असंतुष्ट हो रहे हैं, उनको सब कुछ चाहिए, चीफ मिनिस्टर भी बन जाऊं, कांग्रेस प्रेसिडेंट भी बन जाऊं। मैंने उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में कहा कांग्रेस वर्कर, एज ए कांग्रेस वर्कर जो हमारी इनर वॉइस है उस संबंध में मैंने ये बात कही। उनका कोई स्टेट्समैनशिप नहीं आ रही है इस समय, उनको सिर्फ ये आ रहा है कैसे न कैसे केरला का चुनाव हो रहा है तो मैं कहीं कुछ ना कुछ हासिल कर लूं। तो ये इसलिए आती है फीलिंग शशि थरूर नहीं, दूसरे किसी में भी इसलिए आती है कि वो पार्टी कैडर से नहीं आता, उसके अंदर में जो है पार्टी की स्पिरिट होती है उसका कमिटमेंट नहीं होता, क्यों कैडर से नहीं आता। सीधे फ्लाई करके हेलीकॉप्टर से आएगा, आप एमपी बना दोगे तो फिर 2 बार 3 बार के बाद उनकी इच्छा हो जाएगी, इच्छा शक्ति जागृत हो जाएगी कि मैं ये भी बन जाऊं, ये भी बन जाऊं। आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट पॉलिटिकल पार्ट, फॉरेन पॉलिसी का पार्ट है। मैंने शुरू में कहा अगर एक्सपर्ट है तो उनको आप उसका यूज लीजिए, एक्सपर्टीज है।
Point. This is supposed to be a foreign policy debate. Jasmine Sandwalia, respond to this view that the Congress feels, or at least people who claim that they understand the Congress party claim, that this is just Shashi Tharoor playing to the galleries. He has already had a problem with the Congress party, especially his Kerala unit, which is why he's made these statements that I have other options. And this is just setting the ground for him to be acceptable by the BJP later on, or setting the ground for his exit from the Congress party. Is that what it has come down to essentially? That anyone who praises the Prime Minister, anyone who praises the BJP is someone who's looking to carry up to the BJP for favors?
It is very sad and unfortunate that we have this kind of a viewpoint. I certainly want to vehemently disagree with Mr. Purohit when he says that Mr. Shashi Tharoor has made a statement because he is unhappy and he's not from the cadres. I want to remind him that this is a very, very parochial attitude to have in 2025 and to praise a prime minister. He's the prime minister. Just let's forget that he's from the BJP. He's the prime minister of the country. And we have taken a very nuanced stand. We took a very good stand on keeping ourselves on neutral ground with Russia. We have a long-standing relationship with Russia. We have taken a great sympathetic view towards the Ukraine Prime Minister also. So we were playing on a neutral ground, and the Prime Minister has followed a very mature and a sagacious foreign policy. And instead of lauding that, the Congress is stooping down to the level of disowning Shashi Tharoor, who has shown the maturity and the sagacity to say that he is very disappointed and he's agreeing. Look at the maturity of the man to say that it was wrong of him, and after 3 years, he agrees with the policy which India has been following. So let's not get mired into petty politics. It is totally petty politics, and after all, we should always remember that the foreign policy is sacred to our country, and no political party should try and run each other down on this matter. And I rest my case on that.
Varun Purohit, do you have anything to respond to Jasmine?
हाँ, मैं यही कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि 3 साल में शशि थरूर में मैच्योरिटी आ गई क्योंकि प्राइम मिनिस्टर को प्रेज कर दिया। वही तो कह रहा हूँ, 3 साल पहले मैच्योर नहीं थे क्या शशि थरूर? जब तो आप नहीं बोल रहे कि मैच्योर नहीं थे, फॉरेन पॉलिसी एक्सपर्ट है, डिप्लोमेट एक्सपर्ट है, जब तो 3 साल पहले तो एक्सपर्ट थे। आज आप मैच्योरिटी अब आ रही तो एक्सपर्ट कैसे थे 3 साल पहले भाई? ये तो सीधा सीधा सा पॉलिटिकल बात है कि केरला में इलेक्शन आ रहे हैं तो ही इज नॉट सेटिस्फाइड, कुछ ना कुछ और चाहिए। क्यों चाहिए? क्योंकि पार्टी कैडर से जमीन से रगड़ाई करके नहीं आए। ही इज फ्रॉम फॉरेन पॉलिसी, फॉरेन एक्सपर्ट, यूनाइटेड नेशंस में करके आए, तो आप उस चीज का एक्सपर्टीज का यूज लो। उसके लिए थोड़ी कोई मैं मना कर रहा हूं, मैं बात कर रहा हूं पार्टी कैडर की। और ये समझ नहीं रहे कोई भी
कांग्रेस पार्टी तो वो यूज नहीं ले रही है ना,
समझेगा
उनके एक्सपर्टीज को तो ले नहीं रहे, उनका एक्सपर्टीज मैच्योरिटी स्टैंड ये
कांग्रेस अभी सरकार में नहीं है,
लेने में नहीं,
सरकार में
मैच्योरिटी ये
भाई,
इसमें आती है कि जब आप
सरकार में नहीं,
गलती मानने में
ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में
होती
किस
है।
बात का यूज लेंगे? मैंने आपको क्या कहा? 3 साल पहले गलती कर रहे थे ना आपके हिसाब से, फिर गलत थे ना वो 3 साल पहले। मैं आपको कह रहा हूं अभी कांग्रेस पावर में नहीं है तो क्या यूज लिया? पावर में मिनिस्टर बनाया उनको, उस जो उनके एक्सपर्टीज उसका यूज लिया।
तो किस बेसिस पर कांग्रेस को वोट दूं?
क्यों करना चाह रहे हो?
अगर मुझे फॉरेन पॉलिसी को वोट देना है, अगर मुझे इस बेसिस पर मुझे 2019 में अगर मुझे इस बात पर वोट देना पड़े कि कौन सा पार्टी मेरे देश को रिप्रेजेंट करेगा, कांग्रेस पार्टी का ये स्टैंड है कि एक एमपी जिसको ऑलरेडी आता है
पॉलिसी तो बनी नेहरू जी के टाइम में, भट्टाचार्य जी। फॉरेन पॉलिसी तो नेहरू जी के टाइम में
आगे कांग्रेस पार्टी को बोलना पड़ता नेहरू जी के बारे में। हम लोग बोलते हैं बीजेपी ऑब्सेसेस अबाउट नेहरू। एनीवे, आई डोंट वांट दिस डिबेट टू गेट फैसल। I have two very important questions to ask Imran Ahmad and also to Ambassador Goel before we move on with this debate. And these are the two aspects, the political aspect and the diplomatic aspect. So I'll first start with the political aspect. Ambassador Goel, please bear with me. I'll come to you for a question which justifies your expertise. Imran Ahmad Ali, if a leader like Shashi Tharoor tomorrow is either sidelined or forced out by the Congress party, will it be a loss to Mr. Shashi Tharoor or will it be a loss to the Congress party?
It'll be a loss to the parliament. It'll be a loss to a common citizen of the country who will feel that if freedom of speech is not respected in the parliament, it will not be respected all over India and in the country. What is sad is that yes, this debate has turned political. However, the main germination of the issue is that it is a political storm that has come up. Now, when we consider the fact that Mr. Shashi Tharoor is being criticized, we are not discussing or we are not determining the foreign policy sitting on this panel. However, we're determining the reprimand, we're determining whether how Mr. Tharoor is being treated in the party. Now, if he is reprimanded, I feel a loss of Mr. Shashi Tharoor to any party will be a loss to the party and not to Mr. Tharoor. And he has given India, he has given the parliament ample opportunities and ample occasions where he has only praised India. He has talked about the right things, irrespective of being, bound down by any kind of political pressure. So is it a loss to the political party or to Mr. Tharoor? It's a loss to the political party.
And I would say it was a loss to Indian politics in general and to a constructive debate. Ambassador Goel, that's the other concerning takeaway I have from this. If any if any constructive criticism and constructive appreciation gets delegitimized by the party, that puts foreign policy of the ruling government on an absolute pedestal in which any criticism gets invalidated. Yes, the Modi government may have been right in hindsight about its policies which it took in the Russia-Ukraine war, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's been right when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump over tariffs, or whether it be in terms of taking a stand for the Indians that have been deported, dealing with China and so on. So these are questions which still remain to be answered as time goes on. But if we have reached a point where if someone from the opposition agrees with the ruling party, he is then disowned by his own party, it now creates a situation that next time Mr. Shashi Tharoor or someone else may come up with the criticism of the ruling government, the BJP has every right to say that, first answer whether you're representing your party's voice or not, because there are questions raised over even whether you're the voice of the opposition. Does this not fundamentally weaken the process of an internal dialogue or an internal scrutiny that should go on with every foreign policy decision?
Thank you very much, Ritangshu. I think you have raised a very, very valid point. There are elections, and the parties come into the parliament representing different ideologies, different viewpoints, and then in the parliament, you discuss the various aspects of the functioning of the government, including the foreign policy, including the economic policies, tariffs, and whatnot. if we want to talk about really all those matters, I mean, I have a lot of observations to make about the parliament today. How much discussion is allowed in the parliament is a matter of debate. There have been many questions raised about not allowing the discussion on Trump's policy, tariffs, this and that. That apart, the fact is that every prime minister, every party in the majority in the parliament has the privilege of deciding how they want to conduct their own behavior, parliamentary behavior. So that is the choice of Prime Minister Modi or JP Nadda, all the leaders really. Here, there is a simple point. Whatever you do for the internal politics is different. Please, by all means, go wherever you want to go. That remains internal. Unfortunately, in the today's globalized world, separation between internal decision making and the foreign policy has become more and more shadow, gray and whatever you want to call it. Do you remember in 1947, after Kashmir, 1948, sorry, after Jammu and Kashmir became part of India, and Jawaharlal Nehru, with the advice from Krishna Menon, from Pant, decided to go to the United Nations to take the dispute over there. And Jaishankar said in the Raisina dialogue that it is the United Nations which converted the Indian complaint into a dispute. Now, what was that? Was he not actually condoning Jawaharlal Nehru because he was advised in that context? So therefore, I would suggest foreign policy decisions, in fact, for that matter, any policy decision is taken in the context of the realities of that day. And we are all human beings. Nobody is always right. I can criticize what Nehru did at that time, but I also recall that it is Nehru's education system, creation of the institutions that I'm today in the service. It's a fair system. I can say that what Rajiv Gandhi did was wrong, but it is he who also got the Punjab Accord. So there are people make mistakes, people do the right thing. We need to look at the decisions in the context of the time. And I will again say really here, rather than being critical of what Shashi Tharoor has said or what Prime Minister Modi did, we can leave all the criticism in different fora really. But when our own foreign policy behavior becomes a matter of criticism like this, I think it's not really good. Because then it shows that our own foreign policy behavior is division. And we do not want to leave that impression.
Now, Ambassador Goel, Ambassador Goel, I mean, I'm not sure I completely agree with. I don't think foreign policy, like any other government policy, should be above board. Yes, obviously, every decision of the government, and I think Jasmine Sandwalia would also agree with me at this point, and I'm assuming she is. Every decision of the government in an international domain needs to be should be supported wholeheartedly. But that doesn't mean that foreign policy decisions should not be questioned, not be scrutinized. However, criticism of foreign policy needs to be grounded in substance, grounded on merit, and when that criticism goes wrong, that acknowledgement also needs to be made. Criticism on foreign policy should never be done on the basis of partisan party lines, and I think that is the one important takeaway we are taking, especially when we live in an increasingly volatile world geopolitically, and an increasing volatile world even in terms of not just internationally, but even beyond the earth as well. That's a very good segue to my next debate. But also before that, a reminder for me to thank my guests, Ambassador Goel, Jasmine Sandwalia, Imran Ahmed Ali, and Varun Purohit. Thank you so much for joining me on this debate. We're going to head in for a short break. On the other side, from international, we go to interstellar, and we look at what are the lessons to be taken for ISRO when it comes to what Sunita Williams had to go through for 286 days in space. Stay tuned.